Hi, everyone, and welcome to Spotlight with Scientists in School. I am joined by Kelsey Moxley, who is a wetland biologist and a fields project manager at Scales Nature Park. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
This is really exciting. I've looked up photos of you. You're always holding a reptile or an amphibian in your hand. Was that what you were like as a kid? Were you always picking up frogs and toads if you saw anything in a pond?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's where my love of nature started, was as a child, as probably many scientists start that way. But for sure, my love of reptiles, amphibians, anything outdoors or nature related definitely started in childhood.
And now you're working at Scales Nature Park as a field projects manager. And I love that you say you're like boots to the ground field work. It sounds very exciting. You also are part of so many conservation initiatives. And one of them I was really interested in is called START. So Save Turtles at Risk Today. Tell me a little bit about that project.
Yes. So the Saving Turtles at Risk Today project started in 2013 when I started at Scales, coincidentally.
Yeah.
And that project specifically looks into turtle populations found within southern Muskoka. It has since expanded geographically to like 25,000 square kilometers, I think. So it's a very large conservation project. It aims to reduce anthropogenic threats to the 6 turtle species found in the area, which include now portions of Perry Sound, Muskoka, the Lake Simcoe watershed. So all of that sort of Georgian Bay, Central Ontario area.
Yeah.
And then within the project, field technicians and volunteers survey for turtles in wetlands and water bodies and along roadsides. When they capture a turtle, because we do have that boots on the ground conservation initiative. So when they capture a turtle, it's measured, it's weighed, it's photographed, it's sexed. Some are notched for unique identification. Technicians also complete nesting surveys to make sure that turtles aren't being hit by cars, because that's one of the largest threats that turtles face, especially in our area. And so with those particular surveys, we're trying to prevent road mortality and locate nest laid in precarious areas, such as the sides of roads. We have permits to excavate those nests and actually captively incubate them and then release those babies back into the wild, which helps augment the population for some of those threatened and endangered species.
So turtles are at risk.
Oh yeah,
their
big
numbers,
time.
yeah. And like, what would the reasons be? Okay, you've mentioned vehicles hitting them, perhaps, but are there other reasons?
Yeah, so turtles face many threats, particularly due to human impact. Just a few of these threats include road mortality, like we were talking about, habitat loss, subsidized predation, intentional persecution, and illegal collection for the pet or food trades. However, road mortality is the largest threat that turtles face in North America today. However, historically, they did lose a lot of their habitat, and because they're such a long-lived species, they are still feeling those negative effects of the loss even today.
Long-lived, how long do turtles live for?
That's a great question. We don't actually know how long turtles live for. It's one of those like great scientific mysteries. We have some ways of kind of estimating, but once they reach adulthood, there's no way to age a turtle. And that's something that scientists have really been looking into and trying to figure out, like, how do we figure out how old these things are? So a conservative estimate would it be between 150 and 200 years. And an estimate that was done in a paper once suggested over 400 years for a snapping turtle. So there's a very large range of what scientists are thinking and trying to figure out about aging turtles.
Wow, like 400 years? Like, that's fascinating.
There was a snapping turtle once that was found with musket ball, like bullets, if you will, found in its body and in its shell.
Wow,
So
That's the first
Yeah.
I'm hearing of that. That's really cool. Now, I think sometimes reptiles and amphibians like are misunderstood because there's like a lack of information out there, and there are so many myths. So I picked three that I grew up with, and
Mhm.
I want you to tell me like either debunk them or say, yeah, there's actually some truth to them. So one of them is about a snake. If
Mhm.
red touches yellow, kill a fellow. If red touches black, friend of Jack. Is that true?
So it's partially true.
Ah,
So the poem or the saying that you have said was written to help distinguish between specifically coral snakes and their non-venomous mimics, the scarlet king snake, which can be found in overlapping geographical areas. So that's kind of where that saying came from. Now, you can't the poem doesn't stand true for all snake species in North America. So one example of this would be that breaks the rule would be the variable sand snake. Now that species coexists with the smaller Arizona coral snake, which is a venomous species, but the sand snake is not, and those two don't follow the rule.
okay. So you'd really have to know your snakes to see if this the coloring works, right? Okay.
Yeah, you can also use geographic barriers. So, like east of the Mississippi River, it is true, but anywhere sort of outside of that area is not.
Okay. Okay. Um, this one, my mom's gonna not be happy that I'm saying that. She used to say, "Don't pick up toads or frogs because you're gonna get warts on your hands." I'm thinking that's a myth because your hands would be covered in warts. I can't see them right now, but anyway, is that
Yeah,
true?
no, it's completely false. No warts here. But yeah, so that is a very common myth that I get asked a lot, actually. And I think where it comes from is that if you look at a toad, you'll notice toads in particular do tend to have
Yes.
the wart myth around them.
Yes.
So if you look at the head of a toad, you'll see that there's sort of these two toxin glands almost on the top back of their head. And I think that maybe was linked somehow to getting warts, but really they actually use those toxins as a defense mechanism. So if a predator, say, was trying to eat them, for example, they could secrete toxins so that they taste really bad and maybe the predator's mouth goes numb, and then they're prompted to spit the toad back out, right? So I
Gotcha.
think that might be a connection where the toxins and the warts
Yes.
and toads having warts, I think
Right. Right.
maybe something along those lines, but no, completely false on that one.
Perfect. Good. I'll let my mom know. And how about one on chameleons? Chameleons change their color to camouflage. Is that true? Like to camouflage and blend into their surroundings?
So chameleons absolutely can change their colors, but the reasoning, I believe, is a little bit different than
Hmm.
changing or than to be camouflaging into their surroundings. I believe that they change color based on a couple of different things, one of which is the temperature and humidity of their environment.
Hmm.
So they may change to absorb more heat or things of that nature. The other reason is also because of the fact, or they use those colors, I should say, as a signal to other chameleons. For example, if a chameleon is getting very upset because they're having to defend their territory from another male chameleon, they will turn different colors to sort of signal, hey, you're in my space, like back off, sort of thing.
Right.
So
Okay.
more so, more so that way than to camouflage into their surroundings.
Right. The other thing that's really interesting is that you run a boot camp. Now, I'm going to say I'm not a fan of boot camps, but yours is a reptile boot camp, which sounds like something I might do. Well, what's involved in a reptile boot camp?
Yeah, so our reptile boot camp is kind of what it sounds like. It is pretty tough to participate in, but it's currently the most extensive and thorough reptile training available in Ontario. It is a 2-week long session that anyone can learn about field methods for reptiles and amphibians for Central Ontario. We do tend to stick mostly to Central Ontario species. Topics include species identification, survey methods, safe handling techniques, capturing, measuring, marking individuals, blood sampling, trapping, and radio telemetry. I could go on. Digital imagery, digital data entry, gear selection, paddle skills. Like 2 weeks, you have both classroom sessions where you sit down and learn about topics, and then we have field days as well. So you'll go out with senior field technicians who have been doing this work for several years, and you can kind of learn directly from them in what they do in the wetland or wherever, whichever environment you're in.
And what age is this for?
So typically we get individuals who are in university or have recently graduated. We do require all of our field technicians who we're hoping to hire for the summer to participate in boot camp, but volunteers are more than welcome to come as well.
Very cool. Now, what's your best reptile experience? Do you have one that stands out in your mind?
Oh, that's tricky. I've been working with reptiles for about 9 years now, so it's probably really hard to pick just one. I'd probably have to say the one thing that I feel most fortunate to experience is the moment when you are done capturing and measuring and doing all of your processing data with the turtle in particular, and you go back into the wetland to where you captured that individual and you get to release it, and you just watch it sort of swim away and figure out where it's going and kind of going into a hiding spot. And individuals react very, very differently to this. Some turtles will zoom right out away from where you are. Others are sort of slow and meander and kind of just take their time. So it's quite interesting to see the differences in individuality and in species too.
Yeah. So this brings up something in my mind as you're talking. How, if you see a reptile or an amphibian out, are we supposed to touch them? Are we supposed to go up and approach them? What's the way to see wildlife?
So that's a good question. In particular, most of my stories are hands-on experience, and that's not going to be for everyone. And that's in particular because I work with Scales Nature Park, who is permitted by the government to directly interact with wildlife, such as the START program, working with turtles. The best way that members of the public and community members can get involved or can engage and behave with wildlife is to keep your distance, stand at a distance and observe. And that's one thing that I find really cool, is that if you come across something in nature, you just kind of stand back and see and figure out, what is it doing? Why is it doing that? I mean, that's probably the scientist in me coming out, but yeah, one of the best things that I think is just to see how they're naturally behaving. So you don't want to approach them. That definitely would probably be scary to the wildlife. They can, when they're scared, they run the risk of hurting themselves or potentially hurting you if you're too close. Especially out of fear. So we want to make sure that we keep our distance, that we definitely don't touch any of the individuals as well. We want to, make sure that they're safe. So if you have to, for example, move them out of harm's way, such as moving a turtle across the road, that's okay to touch. However, if you're just observing a turtle basking on a log in the wetland, there's no need to get really close to spook that turtle off the log, or even to pick that turtle up if you don't have a reason to do so.
Right. So it is okay to pick them up if they're crossing the road and they're going the wrong way.
Yeah.
But other than that, yeah, just stay back. Now, you've mentioned wetlands, and I'm so excited to be able to talk to a wetland biologist. Let's start at the basics and just tell me, what is a wetland?
So a true definition of a wetland is a low-lying area of land that is covered by water long enough to support aquatic plants and wildlife for at least part of those species' life cycle. There are a whole bunch of different kinds of wetlands, and they can include peatlands, which are like your bogs and your fens and your swamps, and they can also include peatlands, which can include like shallow open water ponds and marshes. And all of these have very similar but different characteristics. Some of them have higher water acidity or soil acidity than others. Some are defined based particularly on what plant communities are present in the environment. So there's subtle differences, but they are there.
Right. Okay. And why do we need wetlands? Why are they so important?
Wetlands are very important in playing a role in sustaining healthy watersheds by protecting water quality, providing water storage and infiltration, providing habitat for wetland or for wildlife, including fish, plants, and basically sustaining biodiversity. I kind of think of wetlands as like a strainer almost. So they actually are able to like clean the water as it goes back down into the ground to start that water cycle all over again. They're able to strain those larger particles that we don't want in our water cycle. And they're also able to strain out some of the toxins that have accumulated in that water prior to going through the water or the wetland.
Right. Now you've mentioned that they're biodiverse, and I've heard that wetlands are, teeming with wildlife. Why? What makes them so unique that they can have so many animals and plants living within them?
What's really cool about wetlands is they are actually some of the most productive ecosystems in the world. They're comparable to rainforests and coral reefs. So we're really lucky in North America to have so many wetlands. They can support both aquatic and terrestrial species with a huge variety of microbes, plants, insects, amphibians, reptiles, fish, birds, mammals. Everybody calls them home. Wetlands can be thought of as like biological grocery stores, I guess you could say, in the sense that they have complex and dynamic relationships with organisms that can be found within the environment. And these relationships are often referred to as food webs. So they can provide great volumes of food that attract many species, which use wetlands as part or as all of their life cycle. For example, the salamander uses it for part of their life cycle, and then they go and hang out on land for a bit, and then sometimes come back into the wetland. Or sometimes plants, for example, use the wetland their entire life cycle, such as a sundew, which is a really cool species you should look up.
I'm going to.
So basically what happens is that dead plants break down in the water, which causes an enriched material that feeds small aquatic insects and shellfish and small fish. And then those smaller things are able to feed larger things, and those larger things are able to feed even larger things, as a food web traditionally works.
What about adaptations? Can you think of a very cool adaptation that an animal or plant has for living in wetlands?
Yeah, so other than reptiles and amphibians, because they have a special place in my heart, one of my favorite wetland species is actually the purple pitcher plant. Talk about tongue twister. But they have these really cool specialized leaves that are shaped almost like tubes with digestive enzymes in them. So this allows them to digest flying and crawling insects, making them one of the few carnivorous plants. That's a hard word to say.
It is.
So they eat meat in North America, which is really cool. After the insect is basically turned into goo by these enzymes within their pitcher, they're able to absorb the nutrients by the plant, which helps supplement the nutrients already absorbed by their roots. So it's a really unique sort of adaptation for a wetland. What I think is even cooler about these pitcher plants is that, in particular, there are two species that are not at all affected by these enzymes, and those are midges and mosquito larvae. So they actually use pitcher plants as like a breeding location, which maybe not so great for, the mosquitoes and things when we're out in the wetland, but mosquitoes play their part too. So they're important as well.
What about invasive species? Is there an invasive species that lives in a wetland that we need to be mindful of or try and control?
Yeah, so one of the most prevalent invasive species in wetlands right now is Phragmites, we probably have either heard this word before or are familiar with the plant species. This is a non-native invasive reed that's very similar to our common reed in North America. However, it gets to be significantly larger. It's found mostly in wetlands and grows prolifically. So it takes over moist areas and essentially chokes out all other life that can be found in that particular area that it's growing. Unfortunately, Phragmites can be spread through a variety of methods, so it makes it quite challenging to control, but it can be spread through seed dispersal, by their roots, and even if you break off a stalk and stick it in the ground, it'll grow from that too. So there's quite a few ways that this prolific plant is able to establish itself. Now, in central Ontario, we don't have as much Phragmites as in southern Ontario, but it's coming and it's moving further and further north. So we really have to be careful about trying to control this plant.
Yeah, it's incredible how some plants can take over, though. I'm just thinking I have this gorgeous trumpet vine in my backyard that I loved, but it's everywhere. Like, you know, and like the root system is just unbelievable, and I can't control it anymore. So once they get a hold of something, some plants can really, really spread. It's incredible.
Yeah, and that's definitely the way with Phragmites. It's very tricky to stop the spread of it. But there are a couple of things you can keep in mind when you're in a wetland or if you see Phragmites. One really easy thing to do is when you're in a wetland or you're walking in an area and you come home, just give a little scrub with some bleach to the bottom of your shoes. So if there are any seeds or any other vegetation that is stuck to the bottom of your shoes, or even, you know, those tiny microbes that you can't see, bleach will kind of get rid of those so that you can make sure the next time you go out exploring the environment, you don't have to worry about spreading anything to another ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a great tip. How do we empower kids to save wetlands? Because I know kids love wetlands. They love getting in there. I see them all the time. We have a wetland nearby with their nets. And how do we empower them so that they can get involved and protect our wetlands?
I was definitely one of those kids. But some easy ways you can get involved in wetland conservation is by discovering locally protected wetlands and talking about it. Maybe you learned something here with us today, and you can share that with, you know, parents and friends and basically anyone who will listen. So that's a really important thing, is just to spread the knowledge, right? Spread the awareness that wetlands are super important for our biodiversity. They are home to a huge variety of species, and we do want to make sure that we protect them for years to come. Another way you can get involved is to look for specific conservation initiatives or projects in your local area. So a lot of people may be familiar with like tree planting, for example, or litter cleanups. Those are really great ways to indirectly help with wetland conservation, because you don't want that litter getting into the wetland and then potentially causing havoc. And trees and shrubs, when you plant those obviously have a great impact on the water cycle as well. So you can do simple things at home, like reducing pollution, recycling lots, especially with like recycling or I guess I should say conserving water. One easy thing that I know I do is I don't let the water run when I'm brushing my teeth. And that's just a simple way that we can make sure that, you know, we're conserving water and we're not letting it just run down the drain. Because as lucky as we are here, we have lots and lots of fresh water. Other countries aren't so lucky, and we want to make sure that we have that fresh water for as long as possible.
Kelsey, I'm just going to take a stab that you love animals, but I couldn't decide whether, if I was going to guess, if you had reptiles at home or if that's something like you enjoy at work. So I'm going to ask, do you have any pets at home? And if so, what are they?
As a wetland biologist, you'll probably find this fairly stereotypical, but I have fish. I don't have any reptiles or amphibians. Scales Nature Park is a fantastic facility that actually has a lot of captive animals. So I typically get my fix of reptiles and amphibians at work, either that or, you know, interacting with them in the wild. But at home, I just have fish. but they're fantastic, and I really enjoy sort of just staring at them, and they're quite relaxing too. So
Absolutely. Kelsey, thank you so much. I was so thrilled to hear that you were going to take time to talk to us. We have a workshop called Wetland Wonders, and kids just can't get enough about wetlands. So I really wanted to talk to an expert, and thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
no problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.